I never expected tonight to become the moment everything I thought I knew about my life would change forever. Matthew Carter muttered under his breath as he stepped into the grand ballroom of the tech company anniversary gala, the space shimmering with crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, the hum of conversation blending with soft jazz played by a live quartet, guests dressed in tailored suits and evening gowns, the scent of perfume and polished leather filling the air. And there she was, Rebecca Carter, standing confidently near the stage, glass of champagne in hand, smiling at colleagues, her words cutting through the room as she casually remarked, "Matthew is sweet, but he was never built for rooms like this," drawing laughter from the table of senior executives, including Derek Lawson, whose smirk widened as he watched Matthew's subtle reaction, Matthew's jaw tightening imperceptibly, his eyes scanning the crowd, noting every glance and whispered comment. The way some colleagues shifted uncomfortably, others laughed with indulgence, realizing the impact of Rebecca's words. But he remained calm, placing his glass gently on the marble bar, his fingers brushing against the cool surface, taking a deep breath, reminding himself that the evening was a test of patience and perception, not a place for impulsive reactions. He recalled the months of quiet preparation, the careful management of his private investments and strategic retreats from public life, the sleepless nights analyzing reports, tracking market movements, ensuring that even as he appeared passive, he held the reins of control over assets and influence that few in the room understood. As laughter subsided, Matthew's gaze lingered on Rebecca, noting the fleeting pride and self-assuredness in her posture, the way she basked in the perceived social victory. While he silently acknowledged the imbalance of perception and reality, the subtle power of knowledge, foresight, and patience, he moved to a quiet corner, observing the interaction between Derek and other executives, tracking alliances, noting vulnerabilities, every detail a thread in a complex web he had been quietly weaving. The hum of conversation continued, unnoticed by most, as Matthew's mind calculated each step, each response, each opportunity to reclaim respect and authority without confrontation. The moment felt suspended in time, the ballroom lights casting long shadows, the music playing softly, a mask of composure on his face while beneath it, a strategic mind orchestrated the subtle shifts that would soon turn the evening from a stage of humiliation into a tableau of revelation and restored dignity. As he adjusted his cufflinks and straightened his posture, he silently vowed to reclaim not only his reputation but the recognition of his foresight, intelligence, and rightful place. The opening scene of a journey defined not by immediate retaliation but by careful, deliberate orchestration of truth, leverage, and timing, every heartbeat a reminder that patience and preparation often speak louder than public spectacle. And tonight was only the beginning of his quiet but inevitable reclamation of everything he had once trusted to others, the room alive with chatter, the air thick with anticipation. Matthew standing firm, an unassuming figure cloaked in calm, poised to turn humiliation into triumph. All eyes unaware that the man they assumed powerless was quietly measuring every variable, planning every move, and holding the key to a reversal that would astonish and command respect in ways no public display of emotion ever could. The laughter did not last long, but it lasted long enough for Matthew Carter to learn who was willing to enjoy it. He stood near the marble bar with one hand resting beside his untouched glass of water, his face calm, his shoulders relaxed, while the room continued moving around him as if nothing important had happened. That was the cruelty of public embarrassment in places like that. It did not leave broken furniture or raised voices behind. It left smiles. It left glances. It left the soft clink of champagne glasses while a man quietly measured the damage inside his chest. Rebecca stood only 20 feet away, glowing beneath the chandelier, her dark dress sharp against the gold light, her posture perfect as she accepted another compliment from Derek Lawson. Matthew looked at her and waited for the small sign that she understood what she had done. A glance, a wince, a private apology shaped with her eyes. But Rebecca did not look wounded by her own words. She looked relieved that the room had approved them. Derek leaned closer to her, his voice loud enough to travel. "Some people are made for the front of the room," he said, lifting his glass toward her. "And some people are better at keeping the calendar." A few executives laughed again, smaller this time, more cautious, but laughter is still laughter when you're the target. Rebecca smiled, not fully, not cruelly enough for anyone to accuse her, but enough for Matthew to understand that she would rather protect the mood than protect him. That was the second cut. The first had been the joke. The second was her comfort inside it. He breathed in slowly, smelling cedar, citrus perfume, steak sauce from the dinner tables, and rain-on-wool coats from guests who had arrived through the Seattle drizzle. Outside the ballroom windows, the city lights blurred against wet glass, and the Space Needle rose in the distance like a needle through low clouds. Matthew had lived in Seattle long enough to know how rain could make everything look softer than it was. He thought about the version of Rebecca he had married, the woman who used to call him from airport gates just to say she was nervous before a pitch, the woman who once stood in their kitchen wearing sweatpants and a company hoodie, asking if he thought she was capable of leading a national expansion. He had told her yes. Then he had done more than tell her. He had introduced her to the first logistics investor who took her seriously. He had reviewed her contract language at midnight while she slept with her laptop open beside her. When her company nearly missed payroll during the Portland rollout, he had arranged a convertible note through a private fund and let her believe the board had simply regained confidence. He had not done it for applause. He had done it because love, at the time, felt like building a bridge and letting someone else cross first. Now he was watching her stand on that bridge and tell people he had never belonged near the river. Derek turned toward him again, wearing the practiced grin of a man who mistook humiliation for humor. "Matthew, do not look so serious," he called. "We are celebrating your wife tonight. You should be proud. She is carrying the future of this family." The words were wrapped like a toast, but everyone at the table understood the blade inside them. Matthew felt the room waiting. If he defended himself, he would look insecure. If he stayed silent, they would think they were right. That is how small men design traps. They give you two exits and call both of them weakness. Matthew picked up his water glass, took one slow sip, and set it back down with care. The sound of the glass touching marble was quiet, but Rebecca heard it. Her eyes finally moved to him. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed her face. Not remorse. Not yet. Just the faint realization that he was not shrinking the way she expected. Matthew gave her a calm look, not cold, not pleading, only clear. Then he looked at Derek. "I am proud of Rebecca," he said, voice low enough that the room had to lean into it. "I have been proud of things most people here never knew existed." The smiles around the table faltered. Derek's grin held, but only because pride was still doing the work his judgment should have done. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. Matthew reached into his jacket pocket and silenced his phone before it could buzz again. Morris had already sent the first confirmation. The investment file was open. The voting triggers were being reviewed. The board notice draft would be ready before midnight. Matthew did not need to say any of that in the ballroom. Not yet. Truth delivered too early becomes gossip, and he had no interest in gossip. He looked once more at Rebecca, the woman who had mistaken his restraint for emptiness, then at Derek, the man whose company still stood partly because Matthew's fund had chosen patience over publicity. "Enjoy the evening," Matthew said quietly. "Tomorrow will require a different kind of confidence." The table went still by degrees. A fork paused. A laugh died before it reached anyone's mouth. Rebecca's face changed just enough to tell him she had heard the warning beneath the courtesy. Matthew stepped away from the bar and walked toward the corridor, leaving the music, the lights, and the carefully dressed cruelty behind him. In the quiet near the elevators, he took out his phone and read Morris's message, "Covenant breach likely. Oversight rights active if confirmed." Matthew stared at the words for a long second, feeling no triumph, only a steady closing of a door inside himself. Then he typed back, "Confirm everything. No shortcuts. By morning we move." By the time Matthew Carter reached the elevators, the ballroom noise had softened into a golden blur behind him. All laughter, clinking glasses, and carefully expensive confidence fading under the low hum of the corridor lights. He stood alone beside a tall window streaked with Seattle rain, looking down at the street where black cars moved through reflected neon and wet pavement like pieces sliding across a board. His phone felt heavier in his hand than it should have. Morris's message stayed on the screen, "Covenant breach likely. Oversight rights active if confirmed." It was the kind of sentence that would mean nothing to most of the people still laughing inside the ballroom. But to Matthew, it was a key turning in a lock he had hoped never to open. He did not want to ruin Rebecca's night. That was the strange, humiliating truth. Even after what she had said, even after Derek had used him as a public prop for his own ego, some old part of Matthew still wanted to protect her from the fallout. Love does not vanish just because respect gets wounded. Sometimes love lingers like a light left on in an empty room, making the damage easier to see. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Matthew stepped inside. In the mirrored wall, he saw the man the ballroom had mistaken for harmless. 43 years old, dark suit, calm face, eyes tired but clear. He thought of the first time Rebecca had called him brilliant, years before titles and donor tables and executive awards had changed the way she measured people. They had been in a rented townhouse north of Green Lake, eating takeout from paper cartons on the floor because the dining table had not arrived yet. She had been building pitch decks at midnight, worried her numbers were not strong enough, and he had sat beside her with a legal pad, helping her rebuild the model line by line. Back then, she did not call him background. She called him her edge. The elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened to the quiet rush of rain against glass. Matthew crossed the marble floor, nodding once to the valet manager, then stepped outside beneath the covered entrance. Cold air hit his face. It helped. He texted Morris again. Send me the full package tonight. Board notice, loan documents, reporting history, and investor communication drafts. Morris replied in less than 30 seconds, already compiling. Do you want Rebecca copied? Matthew stared at that question while rain tapped against the awning overhead. It would have been easy to include her. It would have been generous, maybe even noble. But generosity without boundaries had built the very silence she used against him. He typed, no, not yet. The sedan arrived, its tires whispering against wet concrete. Matthew slid into the back seat and gave the driver his address in Queen Inn. As the car pulled away, the hotel disappeared behind him, all warm windows and polished lies. His phone buzzed again. Rebecca. He watched her name glow across the screen until it stopped. Then came the text. Where did you go? He almost laughed at the simplicity of it. Not are you okay? Not I am sorry. Where did you go? As if his absence from the room mattered more than what had pushed him out of it. He did not answer. Instead, he opened the secure folder Morris had shared and began reading. The first document was the original convertible note from 18 months earlier, signed when Rebecca's company had been 37 days from a cash crisis that no one had admitted out loud. The second was a reporting covenant requiring accurate cash coverage, vendor exposure, and expansion liabilities. The third was a summary of delayed payables from the Portland and Boise routes, reclassified in ways that made the numbers look cleaner than they were. Matthew read every line without blinking. The rain blurred the city lights outside the car window, turning Seattle into a watercolor of consequences. By the time he reached home, he knew enough to understand the shape of the morning. Derek Lawson had not merely joked at a dinner. He had presided over a company dressing risk as confidence, and Rebecca had helped sell that image because it made her feel powerful to stand beside it. Matthew entered the apartment quietly. The place was dark except for the kitchen pendant light Rebecca always left on when they went out together. He stood under it for a moment, looking at the marble counter, the framed photos, the clean arrangement of a life that had started to feel staged. Then he walked into his home office, shut the door, and turned on the desk lamp. The room came alive in amber light. Leather chair, walnut desk, shelves of old investment books, the photograph from their first anniversary facing him from a silver frame. He set it face down, not in anger, in clarity. He opened his laptop, downloaded the files, and began marking the sections that mattered. Covenant breach, reporting discrepancy, enhanced review rights, interim oversight, board notification. Each phrase was dry, legal, almost lifeless, yet together they formed a road back to the respect he had let slip away piece by piece. At 11:58, Rebecca came home. He heard her keys, her heels, the careful pause outside his office door. Matthew, she called softly. He did not answer right away. He highlighted one final clause, saved the document, and closed the laptop halfway. When she opened the door, her makeup was still perfect, but the confidence from the ballroom had thinned. You left without telling me, she said. Matthew looked up. You stayed without noticing why I would. Her face tightened. It was a joke. He leaned back in his chair, calm enough to make the room feel smaller. No, he said. It was a receipt. Rebecca frowned. A receipt for what? Matthew slid one printed page across the desk, stopping it at the edge nearest her. She looked down, and her expression shifted as she recognized the company name, the financing structure, the signature line she had never connected to him. For every time I stood behind you, he said quietly, while you told people I was not standing anywhere important. Rebecca's footsteps echoed softly across the polished hardwood as Matthew remained seated, the papers laid out in precise order before him, each a record of oversight and meticulous tracking that revealed the cracks in Derek Lawson's empire. The documents cold and unyielding, yet providing Matthew a quiet sense of control he had not felt in months. And as he highlighted the clauses that mattered most, his mind flicked back to the small apartment where they had first discussed company structure. Over instant coffee and takeout, her enthusiasm for strategy and his careful calculations forming a rhythm they had shared long before public humiliation had tested their connection. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the tall windows in a rhythmic pattern, mirroring the pulse of thought racing through his mind. He knew that every detail mattered, every line of financial oversight a stepping stone to reclaiming what had been undermined. And when she entered the room, her face showing subtle signs of apprehension, Matthew did not immediately respond to her presence, but instead organized the documents so that the first page she saw was the one showing her miscalculations and omissions. It was not vengeance, but clarity, the type that allowed a person to see the truth of their own decisions. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, scanning the numbers and legal jargon she had overlooked in her ambition to impress Derek. The quiet hum of the city beyond the window seemed to fade as the room filled with the gravity of accountability. Matthew finally looked up and spoke in measured tones. These documents outline everything that has been mishandled and the adjustments needed to bring the company back under proper governance. He paused, letting the weight of responsibility settle. Rebecca's gaze softened, not with relief, but with a dawning realization of the consequences of her actions. She had wielded power in the wrong hands and now faced the reality of oversight meticulously reconstructed. Matthew's demeanor remained calm, an anchor amidst the emotional currents. He walked her through each section, explaining the significance without condescension, and as they navigated the details together, the tension between them shifted, forming a bridge built from understanding rather than confrontation. Every highlight, every annotation became a tool for instruction, not punishment, and in this orchestrated space, the balance of authority and respect began to realign, showing Rebecca not just her errors, but the framework for making amends and rebuilding credibility. Matthew maintained a composed exterior, but inside, the satisfaction of seeing clarity restore itself was palpable. The night outside darkened further, lights reflecting off wet streets, emphasizing the isolation of the moment, yet underscoring the intimacy of shared responsibility. By the time they reached the final pages, Rebecca's expression had transformed, the initial shock giving way to engagement, questions, and acknowledgement, and Matthew knew that while the path ahead would require effort and vigilance, the foundation for reclaiming their shared integrity and control was firmly in place, a quiet understanding passing between them that would guide the actions of tomorrow. Every step deliberate, every correction methodical, the company's stability now tethered to meticulous oversight, and as the clock ticked past midnight, the room held a silent promise of diligence, the calm before the structured storm of accountability that would ensure that the missteps of the past were rectified, and both Matthew and Rebecca could move forward with clarity and purpose. Their partnership reframed not by humiliation, but by the deliberate reconstruction of authority and responsibility. Morning came gray and wet over Seattle, the kind of morning where the city looked washed clean from a distance, even if nothing inside Matthew Carter felt clean yet. He was awake before 6, sitting in his home office with the desk lamp still on, the printed documents arranged in 3 stacks: financing, reporting, and governance. Rebecca had gone quiet after midnight, not because the conversation was finished, but because the truth had finally become too heavy to keep lifting without rest. She had stood in the doorway for a long time before leaving, one hand wrapped around her phone, her face pale under the hallway light. and Matthew had let her go without calling her back. He had spent too many years softening the end of difficult moments so she would not have to feel their full shape. Not this time. His coffee had gone cold beside the laptop, untouched since 4:30, while the rain traced thin silver lines down the glass. At 6:20, Morris called. Matthew answered on the first ring. "The covenant breach is confirmed," Morris said, his voice clipped and steady, the voice of a man who knew bad news behaved better when spoken plainly. Cash coverage was below threshold for 2 consecutive reporting periods. Vendor exposure was understated. Investor communications omitted the full Portland and Boise liability. Matthew looked at the highlighted page in front of him. Oversight rights. Active. We can issue board notice immediately and request temporary control over financial reporting, expansion approvals, and investor communications. The words landed exactly where Matthew expected, but expectation did not make them lighter. "Do it," he said. Morris paused. "Rebecca?" Matthew looked toward the closed office door. Behind it, somewhere in the apartment, his wife was awake or pretending not to be. "No copy yet. This is not a marital negotiation." "Understood." After the call ended, Matthew stood and opened the office door. The apartment was dim, the kitchen pendant lights glowing softly over the island. Rebecca sat there in silence, still wearing the sweater she had changed into after the gala, both hands around a mug of tea she had not touched. Her eyes lifted to him, and for once she did not look like a vice president preparing to control a room. She looked like a woman waiting for the consequences of a sentence she wished she could pull back. "Is it bad?" she asked. Matthew walked to the coffee machine, poured fresh coffee, and took his time before answering. "It is real." She flinched at that, because real was harder than bad. Bad could be explained away. Real had paperwork. "What happens now?" "Board notice goes out. The fund requests temporary oversight." Rebecca swallowed. "Of Derek's company." Matthew turned toward her. "Of the company your career has been tied to?" "Yes." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I did not know the reports were that weak." "You did not want to know?" he said quietly. She looked down. The old Rebecca would have objected to that. The old Rebecca would have said he was being unfair, that logistics growth was complicated, that Derek had vision, that pressure made people imperfect. This Rebecca stayed silent, and the silence told him she was learning the difference between being attacked and being held accountable. Matthew took his coffee and sat across from her, not close, not far, the kitchen island between them like neutral ground. "I need you to understand something before the calls start," he said. "This is not about me humiliating Derek because he humiliated me. If it were just last night, I would have left the ballroom and let time do what time does." Rebecca's eyes met his. "Then what is it about?" "It is about a company using borrowed confidence to cover actual risk. It is about employees trusting leadership that has been polishing numbers. It is about investors being shown a cleaner room than the one they are standing in." He paused. "And yes, it is also about you laughing while he made me small." Her mouth tightened, but she did not look away. "I am sorry." Matthew held her gaze. "I know you are sorry now. I need to see who you are after sorry." The sentence settled between them, heavier than anger, cleaner than forgiveness. His phone buzzed on the counter. Morris again, this time with the board notice draft. Matthew read it quickly, approved the language, and sent one line back. "Proceed." A minute later, somewhere in Seattle, inboxes would light up. Board members would stop mid-coffee. Derek Lawson would read the name of the fund and realize the man he mocked under chandeliers had been standing inside his balance sheet long before the joke. Rebecca seemed to understand the moment the email left. "He will call me," she said. "Probably." "What do I say?" Matthew took one slow sip of coffee. "Nothing that protects a lie." Her face softened with something close to shame. Outside, the rain kept falling, gentle and relentless, turning the windows into blurred mirrors. Matthew looked at their reflections in the glass, husband and wife, seated across from each other in a kitchen built for comfort, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of public disrespect and private truth. He did not feel victorious. Victory would have required him to want Derek broken or Rebecca punished. What he wanted was simpler and harder. He wanted the facts named. He wanted his silence returned to him without the stain of weakness. He wanted the part of himself he had given away in the name of peace. At 7:12, Rebecca's phone lit up. Derek Lawson. She looked at the screen, then at Matthew. For once, she did not reach for it. She let it ring until it stopped. That small choice did not repair a marriage. It did not erase the gala. It did not change the documents already moving through legal channels. But it was the first morning decision she made without choosing the performance. Matthew noticed. He said nothing. Some beginnings are too fragile to praise out loud. By 8:30, the board notice had already done what truth does when it reaches people who thought they were safe behind polished language. It changed the room before anyone entered it. Matthew Carter stood in front of the mirror in his home office, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal suit, watching his own face settle into the kind of calm that had carried him through investor meetings, failed acquisitions, emergency loans, and now the wreckage of his own marriage becoming visible under morning light. Rebecca stood in the hallway behind him, dressed in a navy blazer and gray slacks, her phone silent in her hand after 3 missed calls from Derek Lawson. She had not answered any of them. Matthew noticed, but he did not reward the silence like it was courage. Avoiding a bad choice was not the same as making a good one, and Rebecca had a long road before those two things could be mistaken again. "Are you going to the office?" she asked. "Yes." "Do you want me there?" Matthew turned from the mirror. "No." Her face tightened, but she nodded, and that small acceptance told him she had heard more than the answer. She had heard the boundary beneath it. "They are my colleagues," she said after a moment. "And this is my responsibility." Matthew picked up the leather folder from his desk. "Today is not about giving you a place to manage perception. Today is about letting the board see facts without anyone trying to polish them." The words landed between them with clean weight. Rebecca looked down, then back up. "That is fair." It was the first time she had used the word fair without using it as a shield. Matthew walked past her toward the entryway, and for a second she reached slightly, as if some old habit wanted to stop him, fix him, soften him, or ask him to wait. She let her hand fall. That mattered more than the apology she had offered the night before. Downstairs, the black sedan waited under a canopy of rain-dark glass. Seattle traffic moved slowly through wet streets, brake lights glowing red against the pavement, and Matthew sat in the back seat with Morris beside him, both men quiet while the city slid by in gray reflections. Morris handed him a tablet. The board accepted the emergency session. Derek's counsel objected to the timing. Matthew scanned the message. Of course he did. He is claiming the fund is overreacting to temporary reporting pressure. Matthew looked out the window as they passed a line of delivery trucks near a loading dock. Temporary pressure becomes a governance problem when executives hide it. Morris nodded. Angela Park is available to serve as interim oversight lead. Former audit partner, logistics experience, no relationship with Rebecca or Derek. Use her. You are certain you do not want Rebecca in the room? Matthew did not answer immediately. He watched a cyclist in a yellow rain jacket cut through traffic, balanced, careful, moving between larger machines with quiet confidence. "I want her to learn that respect is not restored by being allowed into every room," he said. "Sometimes it starts by accepting why you are outside one." Morris gave the smallest nod, the kind attorneys give when they hear pain but choose not to name it. The company headquarters rose on the edge of South Lake Union, glass and steel against a wet sky, its lobby bright with clean lines, green walls, and the company logo glowing behind the security desk. Matthew stepped out of the sedan and felt rain mist against his face. He did not hurry. Inside, employees crossed the lobby with badges and coffee cups, looking up as Morris checked them in. The receptionist searched the schedule, then looked at Matthew again, her expression shifting when the file appeared. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice more formal now. "Conference room 28A. The board is waiting." That word waiting followed him into the elevator. For years, he had been the one waiting. Waiting for Rebecca to notice what he carried. Waiting for rooms to stop mistaking quiet for absence. Waiting for love to protect dignity before it protected image. The elevator climbed smoothly, numbers blinking upward, and in the mirrored wall, he saw the same man from the gala, but not the same posture. Last night, he had left the ballroom with humiliation in his chest. This morning, he arrived with documents in his hand and boundaries in place. The doors opened on the 28th floor to a hallway lined with glass offices and muted conversations that lowered as he passed. Derek stood near the conference room door in a dark suit, face composed, smile prepared, but his eyes gave away the lack of sleep. He stepped forward like he still owned the air. "Matthew," he said, voice warm for witnesses. Before this gets unnecessarily formal, we should talk. Matthew stopped 3 feet away from him. We are past unnecessary. Derek's smile thinned. This can still be handled discreetly. Matthew looked through the glass wall into the conference room, where board members sat with tablets, printed packets, and the uneasy stillness of people who had read enough to know the morning would not be simple. Discretion was available when the reports were accurate, he said. Now we use process. Derek's jaw tightened. You are making a mistake. Matthew turned back to him, calm enough to make the warning sound childish. No, Derek. I am correcting one. Morris opened the conference room door. The conversations inside stopped. Matthew walked in, placed the leather folder at the head of the table, and sat where the investor representative nameplate had been set. No one laughed. No one looked away. Derek entered last, and for the first time since Matthew had known him, the man who lived on applause had to sit in a room where the quietest person controlled the agenda. The boardroom on the 28th floor was bright enough to make every weakness visible. Morning rain streaked the windows behind the long table, turning the Seattle skyline into gray glass and blurred motion. While the board members sat with tablets open and printed packets aligned in front of them like evidence nobody wanted to touch first. Matthew Carter rested both hands lightly on the leather folder and waited until the last chair stopped moving. He had learned that the first person to rush usually had something to cover. Derek Lawson sat halfway down the table, posture straight, smile prepared, one hand near a pen he kept turning between his fingers. The chairman, a white-haired man named Peter Lang, cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, the board has received notice from the fund regarding review rights under the convertible note. We understand there are concerns about reporting compliance. Matthew nodded once. There are more than concerns. The room tightened by a degree. Morris slid the first document toward the center of the table. Matthew opened his own copy to the highlighted section and spoke with the quiet precision of someone who had already removed emotion from the part of the morning where decisions were made. The agreement required accurate disclosure of cash coverage, vendor exposure, expansion liabilities, and investor communications. For 2 consecutive reporting periods, those disclosures were incomplete. Derek gave a small, controlled laugh. Incomplete is a strong word for timing differences. Matthew looked at him. Timing differences do not hide 7 figures in vendor obligations. The chief financial officer, seated near the far end, lowered his eyes to the packet. That told Matthew more than the man's mouth had yet been brave enough to say. Peter Lang turned toward him. Is the figure accurate? The chief financial officer took one breath, then another. Yes. The obligations were delayed and reclassified. Derek's pen stopped moving. For the first time that morning, his face lost its smoothness. They were delayed because the Portland route integration created temporary cash pressure, he said. Every growth company manages timing. Matthew turned a page. Growth is not the issue. Concealing the cost of growth is. The sentence moved across the table cleanly. A director near the window removed her glasses and reviewed the second exhibit. Another board member whispered to counsel, then went silent. Matthew did not fill the room with extra words. Facts need oxygen. Give them too much commentary, and people start looking for motive instead of meaning. He let the figures sit there. Portland exposure, Boise launch costs, vendor aging schedules, revised investor deck. Dry numbers, ordinary headings, devastating alignment. Derek leaned forward. Let us be honest. This is personal. Last night got under your skin, and now you are using fund rights to settle a domestic embarrassment. There it was. The move Matthew had expected. Drag the wound into the room. Make the husband look petty so the executive could avoid looking careless. Matthew felt the old humiliation stir under his ribs, the ballroom, the laughter, Rebecca smiling because silence was easier than loyalty. He let it pass through him without reaching his face. Last night showed me how you behave when you think someone has no leverage, he said. These documents show me how you behave when investors are not looking closely enough. The 2 patterns match. The chairman looked down. The director near the window nodded slightly, almost despite herself. Derek's jaw tightened. Matthew continued, voice steady. The fund is requesting immediate interim oversight of financial reporting, suspension of discretionary expansion approvals, correction of investor communications, and a 30-day governance review. We are not asking the board to punish confidence. We are asking the board to distinguish it from concealment. The chief financial officer looked relieved and terrified at the same time. Matthew recognized that expression. It belonged to people who had been carrying truth in a room where truth had no chair. Peter Lang folded his hands. Who would serve as oversight lead? Morris answered. Angela Park. Former audit partner, logistics sector experience. Independent from all current executives and from Mr. Carter personally. Derek looked toward the chairman. You are seriously considering letting an outside investor place someone inside our reporting structure? Matthew turned to him. An outside investor already placed money inside your company when nobody else wanted the risk. You accepted the capital. You accepted the terms. You accepted the applause that followed. Now you accept the oversight those terms require. The room went still. Not because he had spoken loudly. Because he had spoken exactly. Peter Lang asked counsel for a procedural opinion. Counsel confirmed the rights were active. The director, near the window, requested a vote on temporary measures. Derek stared at the table, then at Matthew, the polished ease draining from him in quiet increments. A motion was entered. One by one, the votes came in. Yes, yes, yes. The chief financial officer did not vote, but his shoulders dropped, as if some private weight had been removed. When the motion passed, no one celebrated. The decision sounded like tablets closing, pins moving, and a company being pulled back from the edge of its own performance. Matthew signed the acknowledgement page. His signature was small, controlled, nothing like the speech Derek might have made in the same position. Then his phone lit up silently beside the folder. Rebecca. He did not answer. Not because he wanted to punish her, but because this room deserved the version of him she had forgotten existed. Present, exact, and impossible to reduce to a joke. Derek stood slowly. This will create uncertainty. Matthew looked up at him. No, he said. This creates accountability. The uncertainty was already here. You just dressed it better. Peter Lang rose, signaling the meeting's formal close. Around the table, people gathered their packets with the subdued movements of professionals who knew the day had changed. Matthew remained seated for one extra breath, watching rain blur the city beyond the glass. He had reclaimed nothing loudly. He had taken back no title with a raised voice. Yet something real had shifted. The laughter from last night had reached its limit. Paper had answered it. The evening light slanted through the blinds of the office, casting long stripes across the polished oak floor as Matthew Carter leaned back in his chair, reviewing the latest quarterly projections. The rain outside had slowed, leaving puddles that reflected the city's neon signs in sharp, fractured lines. Across from him, Derek Lawson paced, phone in hand, waiting for any sign that Matthew would react impulsively. But Matthew remained still, expression controlled, eyes tracing the numbers on the spreadsheet as if they were the last pieces of a puzzle only he could complete. You've recalculated the liabilities? Derek asked cautiously, voice low, carrying the unspoken challenge of someone who feared being caught off balance. Matthew nodded once, slow and deliberate, keeping his gaze on the numbers. Every line, every pending contract. Nothing escapes review. Derek's fingers tapped nervously on the table, a rhythm that seemed louder than it was, highlighting his tension. Outside, the traffic moved in muted waves, but inside, the room contained a different current, one of suppressed confrontation and the weight of authority quietly asserted. Matthew set his pen down, folding his hands on the table. The board expects accuracy, Derek. Misrepresentations are not tolerated. Yesterday's oversight cannot be repeated. Derek inhaled, shoulders stiff, and glanced at the financial documents scattered across the table, each one a small trap for mistakes or missteps. Matthew's lips curved into a controlled, almost imperceptible smile, a signal of the quiet confidence that came from meticulous preparation. I've already alerted Angela Park, he continued, to oversee interim compliance and verify that every disclosure meets our standards. The board will not question her independence. Derek exhaled sharply, tension releasing just a fraction, realizing that the chessboard had shifted and every move needed careful consideration. Matthew leaned forward slightly, voice calm but firm. This is not personal, though last night's events revealed patterns of behavior. Accountability is now in place. You will cooperate fully, or the risk will remain with you alone. Derek's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, the first signs of acknowledgement crossing his face, a recognition of the authority Matthew had quietly reclaimed. Outside, the city lights flickered as dusk turned deeper, but within the office, the air was charged with silent understanding, the recalibration of power established without fanfare. Matthew gathered his folders, stacking them neatly, a final act of order imposed on the chaos of recent events. Derek remained seated a moment longer, weighing the implications, before following suit, both men now aware that the balance had decisively shifted. The room exhaled a quiet resolve, the first in a series of steps that would ensure compliance, restore order, and demonstrate that oversight and integrity were now firmly under Matthew's command, leaving no room for uncertainty or repetition of past mistakes. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the corporate office, highlighting the organized chaos of folders, contracts, and laptops strewn across the boardroom table as Matthew Carter stood at the head, scanning the room with a precise, unyielding gaze that conveyed authority without a word. Angela Park, seated across from him, adjusted her glasses and reviewed her tablet, careful to note every detail, every anomaly in the latest reports, aware that her observations could shift the balance of the meeting. While Derek Lawson fidgeted slightly in his chair, tension visible in the taut lines of his shoulders and the careful way he held his pen, all three aware that this session would determine the immediate direction of the company and the consequences of last week's public misunderstanding. Matthew gestured subtly to the digital charts projected onto the wall, emphasizing trends, revenue streams, and gaps that needed addressing, his voice calm but unwavering as he laid out the expectations for the next quarter, each statement carrying weight and demanding attention, while Angela nodded thoughtfully, her expressions alternating between curiosity and cautious agreement, showing engagement without revealing too much. And Derek glanced between the two, realizing that the careful orchestration of oversight had placed him in a position where every misstep would be immediately evident. The city outside buzzed faintly through the glass, cars moving in patterns that contrasted with the deliberate rhythm inside the room, where strategy, accountability, and quiet tension interwove seamlessly. Matthew paused, letting the silence fill the space before adding pointedly that the client communications must be precise, the reporting transparent, and all team members aligned with the revised protocols, reinforcing that no assumption could be left unchecked. And Angela took meticulous notes, her handwriting fast yet exact, capturing directives and framing them in a way that could be implemented without ambiguity, while Derek, swallowing his apprehension, realized that the recalibration of responsibility had shifted the company's dynamics, and he now understood that cooperation, clarity, and foresight would be his tools to navigate the new environment. As the meeting progressed, Matthew outlined contingencies for potential challenges, assigning oversight responsibilities that distributed authority while maintaining his ultimate control. Angela responded with keen analytical questions that demonstrated competence and a willingness to ensure compliance, and Derek, though wary, began to internalize the structured approach that would prevent further public embarrassment or operational missteps, with each moment in the room layered with strategy, observation, and unspoken understanding that the course of the company and the perception of its leadership depended on precise execution and measured responses. The session concluded with a clear plan, documents organized, responsibilities clarified, and a shared recognition among all present that the past public misjudgment was now a lesson transformed into actionable steps, leaving Matthew's authority reaffirmed, Angela's role validated, and Derek cognizant of the heightened expectations. The room filled with the quiet hum of determination and the promise of restored control. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across the polished hardwood floor as Matthew Carter leaned over his desk, reviewing the strategic projections for the quarter with a meticulous focus that left no detail unnoticed, his posture commanding yet composed, every line of his face showing concentration and measured patience, while Angela Park, seated nearby with her laptop open, scrolled through spreadsheets with a methodical precision, her expressions alternating between analytical concern and quiet determination as she reconciled figures and cross-checked data, aware that the outcome of this review would influence the decisions for the entire department and set a precedent for future accountability. The office hummed with the subtle background noises of ringing phones and distant conversations, But within the immediate space, there was a concentrated silence broken only by the occasional click of keys or the soft sliding of a pen across paper, creating an environment of structured efficiency where focus and precision were paramount. Matthew carefully outlined the updated workflow, emphasizing roles and responsibilities, ensuring that each directive was understood and that contingencies for potential setbacks were accounted for, his voice calm but authoritative, imparting a sense of clear direction while instilling confidence in his team's ability to execute. Angela nodded at key points, her notes meticulous, reflecting her deep engagement and the awareness that her contributions were essential to maintaining operational integrity, while Derek Lawson, observing quietly, absorbed the methodology. Recognizing that accountability and clarity were critical to navigating the complexities of recent challenges and avoiding past missteps. As they moved through the agenda, Matthew addressed each department head's concerns with precision, incorporating solutions that balanced efficiency with oversight, demonstrating not only leadership but also strategic foresight, and Angela's insights helped clarify ambiguities, reinforcing the collaborative framework that would guide the team forward. The afternoon light shifted, subtly illuminating the charts and graphs projected on the wall, each figure now taking on more meaning as the implications of decisions and adjustments became tangible. The team collectively understanding that their coordinated efforts and attention to detail would determine the company's trajectory and the restoration of confidence following previous public setbacks. A quiet sense of resolve settling over the room as Matthew concluded the review, the plan established, responsibilities clearly delineated, and the shared understanding that the organization's renewed strength depended on disciplined execution, thoughtful communication, and unwavering focus. Leaving each participant poised to implement the decisions with clarity and assurance, the environment charged with purpose and the silent promise of regained control and stability. As the morning light spilled into the office, casting a warm glow over the polished desks and chrome accents, Matthew Carter carefully reviewed the latest reports, his expression composed yet intensely focused, every line and figure reflecting the precise calibration of months of planning and attention, while Angela Park, seated across the table with her notes meticulously arranged, added insights and corrections with a quiet determination that complemented Matthew's methodical approach, the air thick with a sense of purpose and the silent tension of responsibilities that had been reassigned and clarified after recent upheavals. The team around them moved with measured efficiency, phones ringing in the background and keyboards clicking as departmental managers executed the new directives, yet the central figures remained anchored. Matthew's voice calm and deliberate as he explained adjustments and forecasted outcomes, Angela nodding at intervals, her eyes scanning each spreadsheet with exacting detail to ensure nothing was overlooked. Each suggestion weighed carefully against potential risks and opportunities, reinforcing a culture of accountability and precision. As the morning progressed, discussions shifted to strategic planning and upcoming projects, Matthew articulating a vision that balanced ambition with pragmatism, his tone inspiring confidence without diminishing the necessity for diligence, Angela contributing data-driven perspectives that highlighted operational efficiencies and potential bottlenecks, creating a dynamic synergy between leadership and analytical insight, the team absorbing both the directives and the rationale behind them. Aware that adherence to these plans would be essential for regaining stability and public trust. In the quiet moments, Matthew reflected on the lessons learned from past challenges, his posture upright and alert, the experience etched in the subtle tension of his jaw and the focused gaze that scanned every document and chart. While Angela's engagement reflected not just technical competence, but a commitment to collaborative problem-solving, her annotations precise and her observations considered, enhancing the strategic dialogue and ensuring that the plan would withstand scrutiny. By midday, the contours of a renewed operational framework had emerged, responsibilities clearly defined, contingencies addressed, and each team member understanding the critical nature of their role. The office atmosphere a blend of controlled energy and deliberate pacing, with both Matthew and Angela exemplifying the integration of strategic leadership and meticulous analysis, a demonstration of regained control and the disciplined execution necessary to restore confidence and drive future success. their combined efforts creating a measurable impact on workflow efficiency, employee morale, and organizational coherence, leaving a palpable sense of progress and the quiet assurance that the company's trajectory was now firmly under guided oversight and poised for the challenges and opportunities ahead. The office hummed with quiet determination as Matthew Carter and Angela Park reviewed the latest quarterly figures, the sunlight glinting off the glass walls and reflecting their focused expressions, each number on the spreadsheets a marker of careful decisions and strategic adjustments implemented over the past weeks to stabilize the company and regain client trust. Matthew, standing by the large digital display, outlined the refined project schedules, his voice steady and precise, explaining how each department's responsibilities interlock to prevent gaps in workflow, while Angela, seated at the conference table with her tablet and notes, added detailed observations and cross-references, highlighting opportunities for efficiency and potential risks that could arise from overextension. The dynamic between them a balance of analytical insight and decisive leadership, creating a synergy that encouraged team members to align their efforts with the broader strategic vision. As discussions deepened, they examined the impact of recent policy changes on the workforce, addressing concerns with transparency and emphasizing measurable outcomes. Matthew offering context and rationale while Angela provided comparative data from industry benchmarks, demonstrating a proactive approach that reassured stakeholders of the company's direction. Throughout the morning, team members engaged actively, presenting progress reports and adjustments, while Matthew and Angela navigated questions with composed authority, clarifying points without diminishing contributions, fostering an environment where collaboration thrived under structured guidance, ensuring that each plan was actionable, realistic, and aligned with the overarching goal of restoring stability and momentum. During a brief pause, Matthew reviewed client communications and financial projections, noting minor inconsistencies and drafting corrective strategies, while Angela checked interdepartmental alignment and verified that milestones were met, their combined attention to detail preventing potential oversights, reinforcing a disciplined operational culture. As the session concluded, the final discussion centered on forecasting next quarter's targets, integrating lessons learned from previous missteps, with Matthew articulating high-level objectives and Angela confirming practical execution steps. The pair exemplifying a seamless integration of leadership and operational precision, signaling to the team that while challenges had been significant, the pathway forward was structured, clear, and achievable, leaving a palpable sense of confidence and collective purpose. The office atmosphere charged with anticipation for the outcomes of their coordinated efforts and the stability they had carefully cultivated. The day finally arrived when Matthew Carter and Angela Park could reflect on the months of careful planning, strategic adjustments, and persistent effort that had transformed the company from uncertainty to stability. Their office now filled with the quiet hum of productivity and the soft light of late afternoon, casting a warm glow across the sleek furniture and digital screens displaying up-to-date performance metrics. Matthew stood near the window, reviewing a final report while Angela adjusted a presentation for the upcoming board meeting, each detail meticulously aligned to highlight achievements and growth, their collaborative energy palpable, a subtle but firm display of regained confidence and authority. They reminisced briefly about the hurdles they had overcome, from miscommunications to unexpected market shifts. Each challenge met with calculated decisions, open dialogue, and mutual respect, ensuring that no detail was overlooked and every opportunity maximized. The atmosphere charged with a quiet satisfaction that comes from seeing hard work translate into tangible results. As the team joined them for a concluding discussion, Matthew and Angela guided the conversation with clarity, emphasizing lessons learned, highlighting exemplary contributions, and setting clear expectations for the next phase of company growth, fostering a sense of shared purpose and collective achievement. The synergy between strategic insight and operational excellence creating an environment where team members felt empowered, informed, and motivated. During the final moments of the day, they reviewed long-term projections, confirming that processes implemented were sustainable and adaptable, noting subtle refinements to maintain efficiency while preserving the organizational culture that emphasized transparency, collaboration, and accountability. reinforcing a strong foundation for the future. As the office lights dimmed and the last team members departed, Matthew and Angela took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey from uncertainty to control, appreciating the careful orchestration of plans, the trust built with colleagues, and the restored confidence of stakeholders, recognizing that the culmination of thoughtful strategy, consistent execution, and unwavering focus had not only reclaimed what had been lost, but also established a stronger, more resilient framework for success, leaving a lasting impression of professionalism, competence, and the enduring impact of measured, principled leadership that ensured both immediate stability and long-term growth.